Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Batteries 101 Part 4, Municipal Considerations for Battery Energy Storage in Massachusetts. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group and the Clean Energy States Alliance, and we're very excited to have some excellent guest speakers with us today. Before we pass it over to them, I'd like to go over some webinar logistics. We have a new layout for GoToWebinar. If you'd like to submit your questions, there is a questions icon in your control panel. We encourage you to submit your questions during the webinar. Just type them in as you think of them. Don't wait until the end. We'll be saving 15 minutes after our webinar for a Q&A, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. Slides and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you via email within 48 hours. You can also find all of these materials posted on our website at cset.org/webinars. This URL is where we post all of our upcoming and archived webinars, so it's a good one to bookmark. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar, my colleague Olivia Tim.
Zareen. I just want to welcome everyone to this webinar, Batteries 101. It's the fourth in a four-part series. First, for those of you who might not be familiar with our organizations, I wanted to give a brief introduction to what Clean Energy Group and Clean Energy States Alliance, what we are and what we do. So Clean Energy Group is a broad advocacy organization for clean energy, and some of the relevant work that we do is the Clean Energy Group Resilient Power Project. Relevant to this work, it was started back in 2012 after Superstorm Sandy, and focuses on smaller behind-the-meter solar and storage projects for critical resilience purposes. Next slide, please. And on the CESA side of our work, that's Clean Energy States Alliance, we're a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. And we do several things with our member states. Department of Energy Resources in Massachusetts is a member. One thing that we also do is the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, or STAP. This is work that's funded by the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity and is administered in partnership with Sandia National Laboratories. And this work focuses on larger scale energy storage demonstration projects. We do webinars, case studies, and support for state energy policy and program development around energy storage. And you can find more information as well as our public webinar series through STAP on the CESA website. CESA also has a project called Energy Storage Policy for States, which provides that direct support to our state members. In addition to that, we host a monthly energy storage working group for those who are interested in sharing information and learning from industry experts and various presenters on energy storage topics. Next slide, please. These are some of our member organizations and states that are CESA members. Next slide. Okay, so today we have a great webinar. These are our speakers. They are in reverse order here, so we'll start off with John Mangiardi from Acton, Massachusetts. He's the town manager. And then we'll pass things over to Jeremy Koo, who's the Assistant Director of Clean Energy at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Then we'll hear from Crystal Johnson, the Assistant Secretary of Environmental Justice in the Massachusetts Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. And then finally closing things out with Ben Hanna, who is a Senior Advisor at Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. So as we're going through these speakers and their presentations, please put your questions in the chat. I likely won't be interrupting speakers with questions unless something really necessary comes up just to clarify, something on a slide or how to read a chart. So we'll sort through the questions from the chat and then address as many of them as we possibly can once all the presenters are finished. Next slide. And just briefly to put this webinar in context, like I mentioned earlier, this is the fourth webinar in a four-part series that kind of came about from a partnership with the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, or DOER, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Department of Environmental Protections. they have all been working together since 2011 as part of their Clean Energy Results program, and had reached out to CISA to kind of create some additional educational resources that would be beneficial to municipalities in Massachusetts in terms of their energy storage work. So this is a collaboration between CISA and all of these Massachusetts agencies working collectively as the CERP. So if you are interested in viewing the previous 3 webinars, I think, Zareen, next slide, there are details about those. They are all available both to watch, their recordings, as well as the slides are available for download on the CISA website. So the first webinar, so this is actually number 4 of a 4-part series. The first webinar was kind of a broad introduction to energy storage and Massachusetts policies. And then the second one, we dug a little bit deeper into the benefits and applications of storage. The third webinar had a lot of the safety considerations, environmental considerations, and security considerations for battery siting and permitting. Oh, and then this number 4 is going to be on municipal considerations. So we'll be addressing a variety of topics today. And again, I would really highly recommend, we had a lot of great speakers on parts 1 through 3. Those are all available on CISA's website. Next slide. And then lastly, I just want to note that this is a webinar for informational purposes only, and that it is really geared towards municipalities in Massachusetts, but it is definitely available and accessible, and hopefully there's a lot of relevant information in here for everybody. If you are a municipal official from Massachusetts, we just want to welcome you to identify yourself as such when you do type a question into the chat. We're going to try and prioritize questions from folks in Massachusetts and who are specifically dealing with these relevant issues. Of course, anyone is welcome to ask questions, but we are still going to be focusing on those that are kind of geared towards specifics of what's going on in Massachusetts. So please make sure you put those in the chat kind of as we go through. And like we've mentioned, this will be recorded and available along with the slides on our website. And I think with that, unless there's another slide, Zareen, I think we're ready to hand things over to our first presenter, and that would be John Mangiardi. So again, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have all these great presenters on board today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Mangiarati. I'm the town manager in Acton, and I'm excited to be part of this panel and to kick it off. And you'll hear from a lot more people with a lot more expertise than I do about this subject, but I'm happy to get things started and talk a little bit about my experience here as a town manager. And it's flavored a little bit with some of my recent experience serving on the state's Commission for Energy Infrastructure, Siting, and Permitting, where I learned a lot about work that's we're all trying to advance in this area. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the process for batteries storage systems to be installed in a community and what it looks like, some of the challenges we see, and just a brief example of one that we had here in Acton. So for those of you unfamiliar with Acton, it's a very community that's very committed to addressing climate change. This photo, or these photos, are from a 2020 town meeting where it was outside. If you remember what was going on at that time, we had the outside meeting. The residents overwhelmingly supported a declaration to declare a climate emergency and to get to net zero by 2030. So there's momentum, there's excitement, there's passion. We developed a climate action plan under the leadership of our Director of Sustainability, Andrea Becerra. And in that, we have several goals and recommendations that relate to advancing technologies such as batteries and finding a way to get them to help with our climate goals. One of them is to maximize the installation of renewable energy and energy storage systems wherever feasible. And so we have a desire, we have energy, but what we don't have is the knowledge and the guidance from educational resources and state resources to help us navigate how to get these things done. So to talk you through a little bit more about that, batteries are relatively new, and they continue to change, and the systems and the how they're installed and how they're used are quickly evolving. Uh, and that technology is moving a lot faster than the training that's available to us as local officials to try to understand it and to try to permit it. We're being asked to make decisions about safety and about siting, about everything else related to this technology that is only a few years old or even newer. And further, the public, the public has a similar track record in understanding these systems because they're so new, and it's hard for the education of the community to catch up with the industry. I mean, the industry, I think people here from the industry know this stuff, but the rest of us don't. And I think there's work that needs to be done to get us there. There's also challenges with financing and procurement, and there's always delays and challenges with interconnection. But that's more of a development side issue than it is for the communities, unless it's one of our projects, which then it does affect us. But anyways, just to walk you through what that looks like, any project for a battery storage system would have to go through several local approvals. The planning and zoning processes include looking at our zoning bylaws and making sure that it's compliant with that. There's a whole permitting process in addition to that, which requires review from our inspectional officials and our fire departments to ensure things are the way that they're supposed to be according to their codes. The Conservation Commission, of course, will look at wetlands and other issues related to citing their resources. The Board of Health has a pretty big role here, at least here in Acton. It may be different in other communities, but they permit hazardous materials storage, and because of what batteries are made out of, they're considered something that they have to permit. And so that's a whole process that has to happen. And then, of course, the select board or the council, or depending on your community, whoever's in charge of site plan and the utility poles, you have to approve new infrastructure being installed to serve the new facilities. Engineering gets involved, and then there's the tax office, the assessor's office, the manager's office, or the mayor's office. Somebody has to get involved with the developer to talk about how to add that to the tax base, and usually there's a pilot agreement, and in some cases there's a community benefits agreement. A little bit further on the permitting, our building inspector and commissioner are required to adhere to the state building code, which changes, but they keep track of it the best they can. Our electrical inspector has electrical code. The fire department has all kinds of fire regulations, and a lot of those are not showing us what we need to see and giving us the information that we need to permit these battery projects. And it's been a real challenge for us locally. So just to walk you through a project here in Acton that did get permitted and approved a few years ago. It's a snapshot of how long these can take and the concurrent processes that have to take place. But we had a 5 megawatt project that was proposed at a facility, an existing commercial property, wanted to add a battery to the site. And so it had to go to our select board, and it had to go to the Board of Appeals, the Board of Health, Conservation, etc. So they filed an application in July with the site plan authority, which is the select board. It was the first hearing was held in October. Hearings continued all through the winter and then finally closed in February. During that period, the select board received hundreds of comments, written, many in person and otherwise, with concerns from the neighborhood, concerns from advocates, concerns from opponents, all about the proposal and what it means to them and how it impacts them. Ultimately, the board did approve the project after requiring several changes to the site, and they issued a decision in April. So it went from July to April before it got the first process accomplished. And some very important changes were made to the site plan due to the community engagement and the public comments that made a difference, I think made the project better. At the same time, the developer had to go to the Board of Appeals because of the zoning implications for that site. They needed to approve that it met zoning. So that was a process that also took place that winter. At the same time, they were also going before the Board of Health at their bi-monthly meetings to try to permit the battery, the hazardous materials, right? So same thing. A lot of questions from Board of Health members who said, okay, we know what batteries are. We know that they're important, but do we know if they're safe? Do we know if the hazardous materials that we're permitting are appropriate to be putting where we're putting them? Those are all questions that they had, and the community had the same questions. So the same thing, a lot of public engagement, a lot of questions back and forth over several months. Ultimately, it was approved, and some changes were made that made the project better. Conservation Commission, same thing, feedback, wetlands, make sure we're away from all the stuff you're supposed to do. And then the DEP approved after that. So that took several quarters. I think it's probably more quarters than the developer wanted it to take to get a project approved. And this doesn't even reflect the process that had to take place where they met with my office and the assessor to figure out the pilot agreement. And so there's probably more time in here that's not even shown. So what are some lessons learned? We need more guidance. Our fire departments, our building officials, electrical inspectors need to be able to refer to guidance to say, yes, this works and here's why. And it's just not there. The lack of consistent technical and safety standards makes it difficult to navigating permitting processes. So we know that there's a benefit to the battery storage systems, and we obviously here in Acton want to advance things like this. We just need resources to know that it's going to work out well. And finally, community engagement is a huge and important part of any local project, and particularly these, and we encourage that to continue. So thank you. I appreciate the time. I look forward to hearing the rest of our speakers.
Okay, thank you. I think we can pass things on to Jeremy Koo.
Great. Thank you, Zareen. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Coombe, the Assistant Director of the Clean Energy Department at Metropolitan Area Planning Council. MAPC, for folks who aren't aware, is the regional planning agency that serves the people who live and work in the 101 communities in the Metro Boston area. Through our Clean Energy Department and other departments, we're committed to helping our communities equitably realize their individual and the Commonwealth's overall climate mitigation resiliency goals and encouraging the regional collaboration on planning and implementation to do that. Thanks, John, for that introduction. We have the opportunity to work alongside John and others, which you'll hear more about, I believe, from Ben later in this presentation on the Commission on Energy Infrastructure, Siting and Permitting. So with that, I think I'll be taking I think John spoke very specifically about his experiences. His experiences are not alone relative to the other municipalities around the Commonwealth that are figuring out how best to engage with storage. And so I'll be doing a little bit of a zoom out, I think, on some of the approaches that we've seen other municipalities look at to try to figure out the best ways to approach storage. So obviously, storage is one of the very critical pieces in the scale up of clean energy infrastructure that's needed to meet the Commonwealth's climate goals under our various climate acts. Not pictured on the site is really, I think, where all of this infrastructure needs to be sited. This map alone is just the projects from Eversource that they shared in their electric sector modernization plan, which was recently approved over the next 10 years. Just the number of substations that need to be built, upgraded, DER and storage projects that they're planning on encouraging, study areas where there may be clusters of DER projects, or sorry, distributed energy resource projects that will all be needed to meet our Commonwealth's goals. So there's quite a lot of things that will directly impact our communities. As John pointed out, our communities and municipal staff are tasked with doing quite a bit on the permitting, zoning, et cetera, front for clean energy products, including storage. John talked about some of the benefits of storage, and really across our municipalities, there are a lot of interest and a lot of benefits related to battery energy storage that municipalities are considering. There's interest in installing storage in municipal facilities as part of municipal climate goals. There are energy benefits and also resiliency benefits for municipal operations to keep critical operations going in the event of outages, offering outage shelters, a lot of interest in pairing solar and storage. You can see in the top of, I think that's actually Acton High School for the storage project you all installed there a few years back. There's also, there's still the 51 communities in Massachusetts that are served by municipal utilities, and there's a big push from the municipal light plants through the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, 50 megawatts of storage that they're in the process of procuring for their various utility partners to provide municipal utility grid management services. And overall, there's a strong desire from a lot of our communities that have commitments to advancing climate goals to really lead by example in this space. Oops, sorry, wrong button. At the same time, there are a lot of concerns. I won't really go into the details. But if you want to talk more about the safety environmental considerations around storage, the part 3 of this webinar series went into quite a lot of detail about it. But as John pointed out, there really are a lot of concerns about storage and other clean energy infrastructure from municipalities and members of the community. As with all new technology, there's quite a lot of unknowns, and that leads to quite a bit more scrutiny. And every time there's another big news article about some other impact that a project has had, that can add to the sort of fear of the unknown elements around the risks associated with battery storage. In general, it's sort of cluster some of the concerns that we've heard about storage from our communities. Obviously, I think this doesn't just isn't just associated with storage, but it's also solar, other grid infrastructure. But there are concerns about the land use impacts from what these projects will require and the sheer number of them that will need to be developed around the Commonwealth in order to meet our goals. There's the concerns about fire risk and the associated water contamination risk if anything happens to the batteries. Sort of wrapped into both of those is the conservation of natural resources and natural and working lands that a lot of our communities treasure. And then also importantly, which I'm sure we'll hear more about from Crystal, batteries are just another long line of potential infrastructure improvements that could perpetuate the environmental justice and equity issues that we've seen in the siting of energy infrastructure historically. Many of our communities have disproportionately borne the burden of environmental pollution, hosting infrastructure, and it's important for us to assess as we scale up infrastructure and storage how the impacts of hosting this infrastructure are being borne across the communities and not exacerbate and perpetuate these historical inequities. Really, I think there's, I had a municipal staff member say to me, where our community's fine with all the storage, but we don't really all of the solar, but we really don't want any of the storage in their community. There's too many things we don't know about it, and I think that's really a reflection of a lot of attitudes from across the Commonwealth with regards to concerns around storage. There are won't go into I think too much more detail on this, but there's the technology is new, the incentives that are available to support it, how they're paired with storage, things like that keep changing, and there's as John spoke to, I think quite a lot of training capacity building that's needed for municipal staff to be able to feel they can confidently assess, inspect, permit these projects. Additionally, public awareness around the potential benefits and risks. It also has, I think, quite a lot of gaps around it. Uh, I want to talk a bit about zoning because I think zoning is really an area where we have seen a lot of action from municipalities and going in quite a few different directions as a result of, I think, some of the more limited guidance here from the state. Um, there's been, I think, widespread use of zoning bylaws across municipalities for solar PV. I think it's one of the successes of state leadership here through green communities and the model PV zoning bylaw that hundreds of our communities have adopted uh, bylaws that help facilitate and provide consistency for the installation of solar PV. It's been a lot more limited and a lot wider in variation for storage. You can broadly characterize some of the bylaws that have been passed in communities around the Commonwealth into bans, temporary moratoria, and other requirements and regulations that are more similar to things that we see for PV and other projects. Usually, where these bylaws exist, they tend to, in the same way with solar PV, be fairly, much more limited for small scale residential scale systems, often allowed by right with fewer restrictions. But for the larger commercial and utility scale systems, they're quite a bit more in terms of those requirements. Important, I think, for the broader conversation as well is that the Energy Facility Siting Board and Department of Public Utilities has the authority to exempt projects from local zoning for larger scale facilities. Um, the Dover Amendment or Chapter 48, Section 3, prevents zoning ordinances and bylaws that prohibit or unreasonably regulate solar installations, except where necessary to protect public health, safety, or welfare. Go into a little bit further why that's relevant for storage, but 2 years ago, the Supreme Judicial Court made its first interpretation of this with regards to solar. It was not I think uh, a definitive ruling as far as what it the in Tracer Lane. I'm not a lawyer, but in Tracer Lane, they were, I think, fairly consistent with prior rulings on other ancillary components to projects that would be protected by the Dover Amendment. And while they ruled that um, City of Waltham's uh, zoning ordinance that made available only 2% of available land for solar PV was too restrictive. They did not say what would be a reasonable amount of land area available for projects. Would not run afoul of this. So that probably not the last time that we've heard about this. We've also, I think, seen DPU rulings that have ruled utility scale storage as public service corporations in the past year, and so that also has impacts on who has jurisdiction and how state boards can exempt projects from local regulations. For folks who aren't familiar, the AG's office as a municipal law unit reviews zoning bylaws and has some limited powers of disapproval with a lot of deference and a presumption in favor of the validity of municipal bylaws. They don't look at the policy arguments, but look at where there might be inconsistencies between zoning bylaws and the state law or constitution. And so, as I said, what we've seen in the past 2 years since Tracer Lane is quite a few municipalities have passed bylaws that have been ruled on by the AG's office. The first broad category is the bans. A number of municipalities have tried to ban, particularly larger scale battery energy storage, and Tracer Lane has been important in that the AG's office has ruled that battery storage qualifies as a structure that facilitates the collection of solar energy and is entitled to the same protections under Chapter 48, Section 3, regardless of whether it's tied to a solar installation. A standalone battery storage, in the Attorney General's view, is protected, and so they have uh, disapproved pretty much all of the bans or near bans. A near ban being, there's a storage is restricted to a particular zoning district, and the zoning district is either too small or has too restrictive of requirements that effectively amounts to a near ban. The AG has disapproved zoning provisions related to that. There have been communities that have passed moratoria to put a 1 or longer year moratoria on the use of land for battery storage. The AG has disapproved these as well, absent where there's been I think significant discussion around justifying the moratoria as the solution. I think the only instance that we could find that where the AG approved a moratoria was before Tracer Lane, where the town of Medway had specifically already launched the study to develop new bylaws around storage and issued a moratoria for a brief period, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. Lastly, there's been, I think, quite a few municipalities that have passed bylaws that were approved by the AG seeking to regulate battery storage. And I think you can see there's quite a lot of variation in these. Generally, you can say the smaller tiers of battery storage have fewer requirements. The larger tiers, and there's a variety, and there's some communities have 2 tiers, some have 4 tiers, some have 3 tiers in terms of capacity that they look at. You're looking at site plan reviews, special permitting, for those larger projects. But there's really a lot of inconsistencies here. Additionally, as if the building energy code starts speaking more to battery storage in the future, that's another element around zoning that they may be superseded by the state code, as the AG typically highlights in their ruling on some of these bylaws. John pointed out a year-long process in town of Acton. Town of Medway's the Medway Grid project is one that is was about a couple of years and still counting. The moratoria that I previously mentioned was imposed about 3 years ago. Medway Grid was seeking to build the pictured 500 megawatt hour storage project, and they filed with the EFSB for a zoning exemption. The moratorium again was approved by the AG, but clarified that because the Medway Grid project had EFSB jurisdiction, that it would be exempted from that moratorium. The project developer then signed a host community agreement with the town that unlocked, I think, a couple $1 million of funding for local projects and training. Ultimately, the EFSB punted the project to DPU as not subject to jurisdiction, and the DPU granted those zoning exemptions. And so the construction process is still ongoing. So it could be, another couple of years until we see the project actually built, and potentially 5 years from when the project was envisioned to when it was actually completed. John spoke to this already, and I think we'll hear more from some of the presenters later. But state guidance is one of the things we consistently hear from our communities. Again, we really have, I think, a strong success story from the work that DOER has put through in green communities to address solar zoning and permitting, both from a model zoning bylaw for solar PV and expedited permitting, encouraging clear permitting checklists from communities as part of achieving green communities designation. Hopefully we'll hear more about my understanding is there's a model storage bylaw under development from DOER, which will provide a lot of clarity and guidance to communities. And then lastly, you'll hear from again from Ben about some of the findings from the commission, the siting commission, much of which was reflected in draft legislation that didn't make it across the finish line in the last session, but some of the recommendations in that from the commission that were reflected in those draft bills included further guidance and resources to build municipal capacity and consistency across communities with their processes that could help to streamline these processes in the future. That's it for me. I'll pass it on to, I think Crystal's next.
Greetings, everybody. I am Crystal Johnson, and I'm Assistant Secretary of Environmental Justice and Equity in Massachusetts in the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And I'm excited to connect with everyone here regarding environmental justice and equity as a significant component of battery energy storage. I plan to present the planning context regarding environmental justice history, what Massachusetts is doing, what's happening, and more importantly, best practices that can help serve municipalities. It is also my hope that I provide a new lens or I help affirm your understanding of environmental justice and equity, but in a greater manner that expands your thinking and how you proceed in your work. In the last 10 plus years, safety, reliability, efficiency, and affordability were the main tenets of energy planning. And since then, things have evolved so that social and policy, given the climate, have placed new requirements to help integrate energy justice and equity strategies in your energy planning. And this is for the purpose of achieving a more fair and equitable just distribution of the environmental, economic, and social benefits and burdens within an energy system. So I'm going to ask you just to think for a moment, what is your understanding of environmental justice and equity? And I just want to give a little information that will help frame your understanding. There are three that I'm going to focus on regarding three frameworks within environmental and energy equity. There's procedural equity, which is to create an inclusive decision-making process. So the things that I'll talk about will pertain to that. There's also structural equity, and that recognizes and addresses how government organizations, other institutions, coupled with social structure have created maybe inequities, disparities. And then there's also distributional equity, which ensures the burdens and benefits are distributed between all communities fairly. So as you start with your understanding and thinking about what it is, I want to just touch upon some of the history regarding environmental justice, just so people can understand the context of where we're going. So starting in the late 1960s, the early 1970s, there was a grassroots effort in the United States where minority and low-income, disadvantaged communities, underprivileged communities faced disproportionate environmental burdens. And that was mostly due to they did not have economic power, so they usually didn't have a lot of political power, and different multi-sector players from government, municipalities, and corporate targeted them regarding zoning and what could be placed. And it did expose them again to disproportionate environmental burdens. And there were, as a grassroots movement, leadership from communities stating this cannot happen. And while it was a hard battle, they did succeed. And in the 80s, the environmental justice movement really came into its own. And that's when the term was coined, first on environmental injustices, yet alone then regarding turning it into an environmental justice movement, which we have now, which is at the intersection of other movements. There's environment and climate, there's public health, there's workforce, food equity, and such. And we're focusing on today on environmental and energy equity and justice. And the energy equity as a term acknowledges that there was a historical and that there are cumulative burdens from the history on energy systems that was borne by the frontline low-income communities, as I discussed. And so now to eliminate these disparities, we do have environmental justice, energy justice, and equity centered in the work that we're doing. And this allows the voices of these environmental justice communities to be present in energy planning and decision making to ensure, again, the fair distribution of benefits and burdens around clean energy planning. And while this is an exciting for what has advanced, it's really impactful what's happening here in Massachusetts. Oh, I might not have been moving. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. And then we'll move to the next slide. In Massachusetts, the Haley Driscoll administration has been in the forefront and quite impactful. The administration has done something that was quite new. While we've always had a Undersecretary of Climate and Energy, an Undersecretary of Environmental Justice was advanced to place it at the equal level of energy, environment, rather than in the margins or a part of those. While they do run across all of them, to give it that weight and pertinence was significant. And they also provided funding to create this undersecretary and the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. There was great funding support so that within the different agencies, offices, and bureaus, within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, we have environmental justice liaisons to help the individual offices and bureaus to also advance environmental justice. So there's a real comprehensive approach that is happening. What happened with the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity, where I serve as Assistant Secretary, is that we have a small staff of 7, and we are a resource to all the municipalities here. And then if you're not a municipality, you're not from Massachusetts, we still can be a resource because we value the work that we're doing and we want to be an asset, and we have some best practices to help you build relations in your community and really advance forward. So please do reach out if needed. Massachusetts is focused on ensuring that there's a fair and equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. And part of that is making sure that our policy and programs is designed with equity at the center. And a key part of that is the voices of communities are involved in the processes. And so that's something that you'll hear me talk about because we're focused on ensuring that there is meaningful engagement in any type of process that results in more equitable public policies. So I'll move to the next slide and I'll clarify. In Massachusetts, with the Haley Driscoll administration, in February of this year, an environmental justice strategy document was released. It was around a 160-page document, but it was comprised of around like 13 different sections for the different agencies, offices, and bureaus where there's an environmental justice strategy for each of them. So DPU had its own, Mass DEP had its own, and so forth. And what it did also include is that while different agencies have different scopes and how they interface with communities, we also did have cross-cutting strategies, as noted there on the right, regarding ones that went across all. And as you can see at the top is meaningful engagement, which is something that I'll talk about further here that is key. We also looked at those other elements there. We'll move to the next slide. I wanted to highlight that given what I had shared on the planning context, what is happening here in the state with our office and the EJ strategy and such, what does it actually mean for municipalities and those consultants that work with municipalities? Well, it means a new approach, which should be hopefully viewed as an exciting time. And we're here to be a resource, again, to help be a bridge. While we're very aware that energy battery storage is a key, significant, sustainable solution, we want to make sure that energy equity impacts are adequately considered as these type of energy resources where we're shifting away from fossil fuels to lower carbon energy resources that we still approach in a new manner, particularly around engagement. If not, this new clean energy transition could perpetuate existing energy system inequities and create new disparities regarding the distribution of benefits and burdens. So I'm excited to hopefully plant a seed of thoughts regarding expanding your lens of equity, or if you already have a strong understanding, to help affirm it and to help you understand how it can influence and maybe change how you move in the work that you do. So for the main parts around environmental justice and equity and energy battery storage is that the inequities of the power system are usually manifested in two ways. the inequitable distributions of burdens and benefits, which I've been mentioning quite a lot, as well as the lack of access to energy transition technologies and opportunities. So I'm going to talk first about burdens. Some people may not fully understand the full range of how burdens are. So I mentioned before, and you're probably aware that environmental justice communities have long borne this burden of polluting energy infrastructure. And some of these disadvantaged frontline communities, face this disproportionate energy effect, which is really also public health issues. They're more likely to live near fossil fuel burning generation facilities and resources based on that historic process. Um, Environmental justice communities, some of the burdens they have is an increased risk of climate-related vulnerabilities, longer and more frequent outages, less access to sustainability and resilience measures, and limited access to the benefits that come with some of the electrification, storage, and other solutions. One key one is that low-income households, reported to spend about 3 times more of their income on energy costs than more affluent households, which puts them at a greater risk of energy insecurity and energy burdens and energy poverty. So those are some of the ways, in addition to being exposed to environmental and other pollutants, that there are these burdens. I will also talk to you about benefits, because while the communities have, from environmental justice, have long gotten the burdens, we want to make sure they get the benefits. Benefits are access to energy storage that is utilized in that immediate community. It can bring affordability. It helps with the decarbonization. It's an environmental impact solution because it replaces fossil fuel and can mitigate local pollution. It helps with resilience. And it's a great social impact tool for helping the community feel empowered and have flexibility. And there can also be jobs, training, and an equitable workforce. So those are the ways that you can look at benefits and burdens. And how do, when you're working on any type of energy battery storage planning and the communities, how are you looking at how benefits and burdens are measuring? How are they being tracked? So some of the best practices, and these are just a few of ones to start with. We recognize that each municipality is very different, and meaning for how they may already effectively engage with different environmental justice organizations and community members. So the first best practice is, one, building relationships long before there is a need for an ask. And the ask is regarding some sort of, public process. And so you want to engage with environmental justice, community-based organizers, and those can be ones that you probably already know of. And if you don't, you can always reach out to my office. We can help you find them. You can search them online. They can be faith-based organizations and community centers in your area. So those are ones that you can start with. And it's usually not just one, it'll probably be several. And the idea is to hopefully build relationships and build trust and repair some historic disparities that have happened. So that your community engagement should be not just public comment period needs or around a siting process, but also starting a relationship before there is that ask. And that is engaging them, asking them to maybe come in for a meeting to hear about what are their concerns, what is their experience, what are they thinking, and so that there begins to have a stronger relation. From there, you can also then move forward with maybe connecting with and developing an advisory board or working group comprised of these EJ contacts. And from there, that will move into, if you are advancing siting planning, how to look at cumulative impact analysis. How does that help shape, that burden analysis of where it gets placed? But we first want to focus on that meaningful engagement, building relationship, building a trust, getting these advisory boards, then looking at all, hearing their voices, their concerns. What does that mean for the decisions? What does it mean in the cumulative impact? So I'll leave it at that. I'm excited to hear from people if you have further questions or how you might have unique situations that I can be a solution to. But wanted to just leave you with what I had opened with, that with environmental justice and equity, looking at the inclusive decision-making process, so there's procedural equity. Looking at the inequities historically and how to prevent them moving forward, so there's structural equity, and to make sure that benefits and burdens are distributed across your immediate community and all the different neighborhoods equally, rather than just how it has historically been. So there's distributional equity. So again, thank you very much, and reach out to the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity, myself specifically. Thank you.
If I get my
Sure, we have Ben Hanna up next. So thank you, Crystal, for that presentation, and thanks, Ben.
great. I think I'm all set with my screen being shared. So I'll jump in. My name is Ben Hanna. I'm a legal and policy advisor at the Department of Environmental Protection. And I'm going to give you an overview of the Commission on Energy Infrastructure, Siting, and Permitting, and the recommendations that it issued in March of this year. The Commission focused on clean energy infrastructure broadly, but the recommendations, if implemented, will certainly have a major impact on battery storage development and change how municipalities permit clean energy infrastructure projects in Massachusetts, and hopefully increase the resources that towns have to review projects on a faster timeline. And I'll just note that I think John mentioned he was on the commission. Jeremy's colleague, Lizzie Wyant, was also on the commission. I was not a member of the commission, but I was helping behind the scenes, help draft the report. So maybe John and Jeremy's perspectives can come out during the Q&A. Slide. So many of you know this broadly, but just to set the context, Massachusetts has set ambitious decarbonization goals with GHG emissions limits decreasing over time all the way to net zero in 2050. And the overriding strategy for achieving these limits is electrifying sectors of our, widely across our economy, transportation, buildings, homes, with clean electricity. So that will mean greatly increasing the amount of clean energy infrastructure in Massachusetts. And yeah, the takeaway is there will be a significant amount of build out of clean energy infrastructure in the coming years. But there's pretty broad recognition that there are real challenges with the status quo of siting and permitting energy infrastructure, clean energy infrastructure. What we heard a lot was the processes can be lengthy and unpredictable and vary widely across the Commonwealth. And this is due to a combination of factors like certain reviews are being sequential rather than concurrent, and the opportunity to appeal, at multiple stages of the permitting process, and therefore sort of opening up multiple appeal tracks that can cause longer and longer timelines. And meanwhile, individuals and communities often feel like their ability to comment or influence or influence a project comes too late in the process to be meaningful, and they might often lack the resources to sort of engage fully with these complex projects in the first place. So with that context, Governor Healy created the commission in September 2023 by executive order, and that executive order tasked the commission with sort of three main goals. One was first reforming the siting and permitting process to accelerate the responsible deployment of clean energy, to facilitate community input into those processes, and ensure the benefits of the clean energy transition are shared equitably. There were about 28 members on the commission, I believe, and they brought a wide range of perspectives and interests, clean energy developers, utilities, uh, municipal interests like John, regional interests like MAPC, state agencies, environmental justice advocates, environmental nonprofits, labor, economic development. The commission met, I think, 13 times as a full group, plus many more smaller breakout meetings between October 2023 and the issuance of the recommendations in March. And there was also, the commission was supported by an interagency task force made up of representatives from across state agencies with expertise in various permits that touch clean energy. And there was also a siting practitioners advisory group made up of attorneys with years of experience working through these permitting processes. So we'll get into some of these in more detail, but to give the overview of the key recommendations, as an initial matter, the commission recommended defining clean energy infrastructure, and notably to include energy storage facilities. And of course, this definition, along with solar, wind, and anaerobic digestion, and this definition, I kind of sets the table for what types of infrastructure can benefit from these reform permitting processes. And speaking of those reform permitting processes, those are really the heart of the reforms. A consolidated permitting process at both the state and local level with mandatory timeframes for making permitting decisions, and then a consolidated appeals process that will sort of in each case, as I'll discuss more in a minute, leads to a single appeal. And then the commission made several recommendations around clear requirements on community engagement, establishing earlier engagement requirements and better notice, improved notice. And then also, related to that, establishing infrastructure within state government to support towns, communities, individuals through these permitting processes. So to get into a little more detail on some of these key recommendations. So there would be a consolidated state permitting process for larger projects, which would be generation facilities larger than 25 megawatts or storage projects larger than 100 megawatt hours. And in that case, the EFSB, the Energy Facility Siting Board, will conduct one review, one consolidated review. The process will include all the review that would normally occur depending on the project. So zoning, wetlands review, any transportation aspects that would otherwise be reviewed by DOT in Massachusetts, plus the typical EFSB review. And sort of one of the keys of this reform process would be that those state agencies and municipal entities that would otherwise have a permitting role, first of all, they could intervene in the process, and they would submit recommended permit conditions for the EFSB to include in a single final permit on each of the areas that they would previously have permitted themselves. And then, another critical part of this is putting a real timeline on it. The final permit would be 15 months or less, depending on the complexity of the project, or else there would be sort of an automatic or constructive approval of the project. And then, as a result of there just being one permit, that one permit would lead to one appeal, and that appeal would go right to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. So on the local permitting, so for all smaller projects that would be smaller than 25 megawatts or less for generation facilities, or 100 megawatt hours or less for batteries, those would be reviewed by local authorities as they are currently in many ways, except the key difference being that local governments would be required to issue a single a single consolidated permit with each of their, it could have it with the different components, and within 12 months. And then to create uniformity across the Commonwealth, the Commission recommended that the Department of Energy Resources would, promulgate regulations creating minimum standards, uniform standards around health, safety, and the environment, and create a standard permit application for these types of smaller projects. This is just a quick visual of this, example consolidated process. You can see on the left, there would be, the bottom half of the left is sort of indicative of, there could be 4, 5, 6, separate permit processes playing out, often concurrently, but separately and with separate opportunities for appeal. And then sometimes, in some cases, those reviews might not be concurrent. And then on the right, you see the consolidated process that would hopefully take place after these reforms. And maybe the key takeaway is that on the left, in theory, that could be indefinite, that process, or those processes. And on the right, under this reformed process, there would be real timelines, 12 to 15 months for many of these projects. Now, on the community engagement piece, the Commission recommended developing specific requirements for community engagement, putting kind of real numbers behind this, like a 60-day written comment period prior to a filing with the EFSB, specifying the number of meetings, pre-filing engagement with the community before an application is filed, to really, putting an emphasis on providing plenty of notice and providing early opportunities for community participation, because that was what we heard over and over again from communities, from environmental justice advocates, and John mentioned it in his presentation. Just the early community engagement is really key to getting communities on board, and this would enshrine, sort of that principle in statute and regulation. The Commission also recommended enshrining the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity in statute. It obviously exists and is already, as Assistant Secretary Johnson told you about, is already doing great work. The Commission recommended putting that office in statute. And that also recommended that office would be directed with to develop statewide guidance on community benefits agreements and cumulative impact analyses for energy infrastructure projects. And then the last two bullets here, they get at sort of the support infrastructure for this process, creating two divisions, one in DPU, one in DOER, dedicated to assisting communities and local governments and project applicants with questions on engagement or the process questions. The DPU, there would be a division in DPU sort of dedicated for those larger DPU and EFSB proceedings, and the DOER division would be dedicated to supporting the local permitting process. And then I wanted to note there were, the Commission made a suite of recommendations that sort of fall outside the permitting process that I just discussed. Of note for today, a couple related to battery storage. One would be the Commission recommended that in the immediate term before these permitting reforms, if and when they take place, before they're established, that large storage projects should be allowed to apply for the EFSB for a certificate. Currently, I think Jeremy sort of alluded to some recent cases where they haven't been, the EFSB does not have clear jurisdiction over those projects, and this recommendation would address that in the short term. And then the Commission also made a recommendation that Mass DEP review and update its noise policy, which the policy is currently based on measuring project impacts above ambient noise levels, and it was raised at the Commission that raises the concern that projects sort of get encouraged or incentivized to be built in more urban and densely populated communities where the ambient noise level might be higher. And I can say that Mass DEP is starting to look at that. And then just to wrap up with the current status, since there's some breaking news on this front. So the Senate and the House in Massachusetts each adopted bills that included all the key pieces of the reforms that I talked about today. That legislation failed to pass during the formal session that ended in July. But actually just yesterday, as some of you may have seen, Governor Healy filed a supplemental budget bill that is filed usually at this time of year. It's filed to close out the previous fiscal year's budget. And that closeout bill includes these siting and permitting reforms that we discussed today. And it just signals how much of a priority this is for the Healy administration to build out clean energy in a responsible way with improved community engagement. So there's still a chance that the legislature can enact these reforms this year. And then I would just say, in terms of timing, those draft bills that the draft legislation contemplates that the process would sort of be established and up and running in 2026 with the regulations that would underpin the process promulgated by that time. And obviously that takes time to develop those regulations with public input, and so that would give the agencies about 18 months or so to get this up and running. Okay, I'll stop there. Looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much to all of our presenters. And before we move on here to the Q&A, actually, we have an additional guest from Massachusetts DOER. So Joanne Becerra is with us today. She is the director of the Green Communities Division at DOER. And we thought it was important that DOER make an appearance to share some of their next steps and plans for what might be available from the state in terms of support that municipalities can expect. And because these plans are still in their various efforts that they're currently undertaking, they're still in the process of forming, Joanne won't be able to go into really very specific details. And I would just, encourage you to, if you do have questions for Joanne, feel free to ask them. But it's very possible that we can't get into the nitty-gritty of some of the details of these plans. But it would be, a good idea to see what comes up, and we'll do our best that we can to address those questions. So, Joanne, it's all yours. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Olivia, and thank you all for participating in this very informative webinar. As Ben illustrated, there's a lot of moving parts, and they're still moving very quickly, which is one of the reasons why I may not be able to answer a lot of questions, because of we're not sure what's going to happen with the legislation and the regulatory framework regarding that. However, I did want to address something that was brought up by both Jeremy from MAPC and John from the town of Acton, is the lack of model bylaws. We at the Green Communities Division are quite aware of the role and impact the model solar bylaw has had on municipalities, and how it provided a framework and a template for communities to create their own bylaws off of, instead of starting from scratch. So we recognize the importance of needing to do that for battery energy storage as well. So it's on the to-do list, if you will. We are in the process of, first we're going to set up an advisory group that will include stakeholders from multiple groups. This list here is not exclusive. We intend to have more folks, but just to give you a sense that we want to make sure we hear from the health departments, the fire safety, Mass DEP, cities and towns, of course, planning officials, utilities, the environmental justice group, etc., just to make sure that they can all help and advise and opine on bylaw development. Next slide, please. Given that we don't don't yet have a division of siting and permitting here at DOER. Hopefully the legislation will pass and we're able to staff up the team here. We're in the process of hiring consultants to do this bylaw development work. So that the RFQ, if you will, is drafted and going through various approval processes. But we intend to hire one or more consultants to help with the stakeholder engagement, to draft language, to go through different iterations of the language to come up with the model bylaw. And then as a side piece, having guidelines developed. So it's one thing having the bylaw language, but then also having citing guidance that several speakers talked about needing in terms of ways to address safety concerns, ways to address environmental concerns, ways to address environmental justice concerns to make sure that these facilities are properly cited and permitting. And we anticipate the work on this will commence in early next year in terms of timeline. So in the meantime, that's what our team is doing, and we are hoping that the legislation will get passed by the state reps and senators to create the siting reform that's needed and to help staff up not only DOER for siting and permitting assistance, but also the DPU and the EFSB. And with that, I'm done and able to answer any questions that anybody may have as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I'll ask now that all of our presenters come back on camera if they're able to, so we can use the remainder of today's time for the question and answer portion. This has been a really interesting discussion and we've a lot of questions, so I want to make sure that we can get to as many as possible, but I apologize in advance if I'm not able to get to your question. We have about just about 18 minutes here until the end of our time. So I'm going to kick it off with a kind of question that we got multiple times here about just generally more information, looking for more information about battery storage bylaws. And folks are wondering if there are any good examples of battery storage bylaws that have been successfully implemented in Massachusetts, and kind of wondering how, if they're critical for the safe installation of storage systems in municipalities. And with that, with the developing the model bylaws, what type of entities are engaged in that process? Is it municipalities, developers, kind of what does that process look like? So I'll just pose that to the group, and whoever wants to come off mute and address that question, we would appreciate your answers.
I'll start off. So the advisory group hasn't yet been established. We still are working on figuring out who to be involved with that and to get approvals for this process. But the goal is to have as many stakeholders as possible without having it be unwieldy. We want to be able to get the bylaws and guidelines drafted quickly but comprehensively, if that makes sense. And in terms of model bylaws, I don't have any specific examples. Jeremy may have more in terms of what the municipalities have been drafting, but I often have been referring people to NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy the New York Energy Office. I forget what the actual acronym is, and they've put together a really robust energy storage bylaw and guidelines and materials. So we hope to sort of mimic what they've done and make it, brand it Massachusetts because we are not New York, but at least it kind of addresses, the breadth of what we're looking to do here. But in terms of, examples of good bylaws, I'm going to defer to Jeremy or others who may have a better sense.
Yeah, I mean, I can't I can't give you a specific example of quote unquote good bylaws. I think I'll definitely be very excited to follow DOER's process and the sort of more in-depth research that the consultant and the sort of stakeholder group go into through the model bylaw process. I can certainly point you to examples of bylaws that the AG's office didn't disapprove for being unreasonable in terms of their restrictions. I assume Olivia, you'll send out the slides afterwards, but in the last 2 years we had approved bylaws from Oxford, Medway, Ware, Blandford, Spencer, Athol, Lancaster, Shrewsbury, and Wilbraham. So there's a I think generally they're all starting to consolidate around the sort of like tiered approach. Not all that different from solar PV, where we see sort of tiers in terms of increasing levels of review, permitting, requirement, and also increasing constraints on where within zoning districts those systems can be sited. Tier one, residential. I think actually that's gotten a lot more consolidated around a single definition. Usually, it's like tier one battery storage is like a sink consisting of only a single storage system technology in a room or enclosed area, and as residential or small commercial scale, and then at the highest tier is starting to be defined as interconnection to high voltage transmission, and some of the ones in the middle are interconnected to the distribution grid. So um, I don't. I think the questions around whether how they're being applied and what are necessarily the best practices for how capacities should be determined are still kind of TBD. I think also whether we see the um, citing legislation passed, I think also will clearly define like what ends up being state jurisdiction by default versus what starts at the municipal level. So I think there's still we are kind of I think in more unknown territory here, especially compared to PV, which has 180 plus communities having adopted a model bylaw, and so can certainly look at any of the examples from those 9 municipalities and get a sense of where municipalities are looking here.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional thoughts on that question? Okay, this next question I think is kind of geared towards Crystal Johnson. And someone is wondering if the environmental justice and equity processes for energy storage, if they're similar to those for more conventional power plants, or if there are significant differences between the two. And also with that, are there any states on the other states that Massachusetts looks towards for guidance when it comes to energy, environmental justice and equity laws or processes?
Great, thank you so much. First, I'll answer the latter one. It's my understanding, while there are great peers out there in environmental justice and equity doing work to advance such in their states, that Massachusetts does stand out as a leader, particularly for how they've structured. While environmental justice and equity has been always there, and most states have that housed, we are, it's my understanding, the first one to have an undersecretary of environmental justice with this office, with this EJ strategy and how it's comprised. So we are in the forefront regarding, we partner and meet with other states, and that's part of my understanding of why we're in the unique space given the structures that we've put into place in the funding. Regarding, is there any difference between the storage planning and other siting? I would say no. The siting process of any type of energy infrastructure should be looked at with the cumulative impact, looked at with that meaningful engagement, and that whole siting process, and more. As I mentioned before, my office is welcome to be a resource to reach out if you're saying like, well, how do we build a relationship before we have an ask also? Because you may anticipate an ask coming, but you don't necessarily want to use that moment to foster a relationship. Sometimes it has to, but can you build something before, cultivate, trust and a rapport and hear of concerns, so that then you move into the siting around energy storage. You have, a greater foundation regarding community engagement already, and they trust you, and so forth. And That's what we're hoping moves forward for. But we anticipate and do support that all infrastructure around energy systems do have that meaningful engagement and such, and that it's not that something is not included in that. But as I didn't mention in my presentation, the meaningful engagement, understanding the benefits and burdens of proposed projects across the community is key. Looking at cumulative impacts of those burdens is what we're focused on across all energy infrastructure planning. And again, we're here to be a resource. We understand some municipalities might not have EJ teams, or they may have, but we can still be a bridge, help you engage with communities and create, a vibrant way to communicate and build relations. That's what we're hoping for.
Great, thank you. We have another question about the Supreme Judicial Court ruling, and folks are wondering if that ruling also applies, if it applies only to a battery energy storage only project, or if it applies to that, or if the scope is limited to solar plus storage. So just some clarification on that if folks have it.
AG Campbell's office has been very clear that they interpret the ruling and section chapter 48 section 3 to encompass standalone storage systems and not just ones that are paired with solar, because my understanding of the rationale is that because storage is needed to facilitate the broader grid's capture of solar energy, it does not need to be sort of accessory to or pertinent to a solar installation. I don't know if that has been. The AG's office cites a particular case that I'm not familiar with in terms of um, that backs the argument that the position that the AG's office takes, but I'm not familiar with that, and I'm not a lawyer.
Great, thank you. And kind of a follow-up question about those bills, and if there are reasons that y'all know if that both bills were not approved, even if they carried similar reforms. Kind of wondering the differentiation between the two. So if anyone can speak to that.
I can just say I don't. I think that's I don't know the answer. It was a reason for much consternation in the Commonwealth, but I don't. I think there were a lot of reasons, and I think it was reported in the press in some places. So you can, but the important thing is I think the key tenets from the recommendations, there was broad agreement. I think it was sort of other things, or at least on the edges of the key, that key structure, that were points of issue, points of contention. So I think what's important is when it does happen, I think those key reforms that we talked about today will be there.
Thanks. Anyone have anything else to add about those bills? Okay, we have kind of a broad question that I think folks are just looking for some resources. We have someone from a planning and economic development district in Massachusetts wondering how can the regional planning agencies provide assistance to their municipalities in the best way possible. And I think that kind of ties into another question that we got about what resources exist for municipalities who are interested in adding that grid scale solar and storage. So what kind of resources exist? I'm just kind of curious what folks' thoughts on that are, if there are other resources that we didn't touch on today. Would love to hear about those.
I would just say a shout out to Jeremy and the organization that he works in. The RPAs for each region are well suited to provide guidance to cities and towns to help navigate this stuff. And we work with them. We work with MAPC, and short of a specific link to somewhere, that would be a good place to go.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly happy, I think, always to work with our communities on, everything from, zoning and permitting to, municipal planning around, their own facilities and goals. We actually, I mean, this isn't, I think, specifically related to, um, zoning of, privately owned large scale storage, but we do have a resource that's forthcoming, I think later this fall on the municipal ownership of solar plus storage, which hopefully may address some of those questions. But I think also, we're also I think in the process, just like DOER, and trying to, figure out both the lay of the land and, where, what are the, you know, best possible approaches to reviewing these systems as they come through.
Good, thank you. We have a question here. So someone is asking, they said they write, siting reform helps with moving projects forward safely and in concert with community needs and concerns, and wondering if there are also local or state level incentives that are being put out there to spur development in certain areas that they want to direct that development to. So that means, additional development in industrial areas or directing development to lower income communities like the IRA does. Are there any of those incentives in Massachusetts that y'all can speak on?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm a little over my skis because I don't live in this space a lot. I do know there's the Clean Peat Standard, which is part of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So there are some financial incentives related to that. Um, they may be looking at being revised in some way, but another team at DOER is actively working on that. So I can't speak other than that I know it exists. I also know that related to storage with solar, the SMART regulations or the SMART program is also being revamped because of up, up until now, solar of a certain size required storage to be included, and some of that may change, or they're proposing some changes to the SMART program. But again, that's all I know. I can't speak specifically on what those are because, again, that's another team working on that. And you did mention the IRA, and I do know there are, direct pay incentives available for certain storage facilities as well. So that's that's all I can share right now. Oh, also, for some storage that's smaller in scale and maybe attached to a building, there may be some connected solutions incentives through your investor-owned utility that are also available. So there's different use cases for storage that some of the other webinars have definitely discussed on different ways to utilize storage and the incentives related to that.
Yeah, Ben, you can go ahead. Looks like your hand is up there.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention, I think this maybe answers part of your question. One of the recommendations of the commission that I don't think in my short presentation I didn't get to is there is a recommendation for EEA to develop guidance on siting with a mitigation hierarchy, sort of basically guidance on to help communities evaluate areas for quality development potential, and how to best avoid environmental and impacts to environment and people. So that will be developed as part of these suite of recommendations.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, it was, I think, the setting commission's, I think, dual purpose of both, not just finding ways to streamline, because streamline, does not necessarily always mean that communities are more effectively engaged and proactively engaged. It was important, I think, for those streamlining recommendations to also be backstopped with the guidance that Ben mentions for what does proactive pre-filing community engagement look like, and how does it effectively engage environmental justice communities and consider distributional equity. So I think we're hopeful that legislation will be passed that then enables the state to develop that guidance, and that it gets brought and incorporated fully into the siting decision making, both at the state and the local levels.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for all of your time today. I want to special thank all of our presenters and as well as the attendees who stuck with us for this hour-and-a-half webinar. We are about out of time today, but again, all of these, the other 3 webinars in this series are recorded and available to watch or to download the slides on the Clean Energy States Alliance website, or right here on the link that Zareen has put up, cleanegroup.org/webinars. This one will be available within 24 hours, as well as the slides for download. I apologize for not getting to everyone's questions. There were a lot of good ones put in that chat, so thank you for submitting those. Yeah, I think that we have a couple of upcoming webinars. Zareen, is there a slide with the list of webinars coming up from CISA and Clean Energy Group? If not, those are all available on our website, and we would love to see you at our next public-facing webinars. With that, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.